This is the planning board meeting for the city of New Brunswick for January 13th, 2015.
Roll call.
Clary Barber.
Here.
Chris Stellatella.
Here.
Betsy Garlotti. Dave Fitzhenry.
Here.
Joe Catanese.
Here.
Linda Hunter.
Here.
Carly Neubauer. Josefa Rojas.
Here.
Andy Kaplan. Jeff Crum.
Here.
Suzanne Ludwig.
Here. Public announcement, Open Public Meeting Act.
Please be advised that the notice requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been complied with and satisfied, that the annual notice will give sufficient notice of the time, place, and conduct of all public meetings of the Planning Board of the City of New Brunswick has been filed with the City Clerk and placed on the appropriate bulletin board in the lobby of City Hall, 78 Byard Street, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and has been transmitted to the official newspapers of the City of New Brunswick, namely the Home News Tribune and the Star Ledger.
Please stand for salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Minutes of the board's January 8th, 2015 meeting.
Madam Chair, copies of the minutes were distributed to the board members. Unless there's any changes or additions, a motion to approve would be in order.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes passed.
Old business, Construction Management Associates PB 2013-25, site plan and variance application for the construction of a residential building located at 17 9th Street, Block 71, Lot 4.01, zoning district R-5A, and redevelopment area 2.
Madam Chair, if I may, prior to starting, I think we'll need to swear in the professionals who were not sworn in at the reorganization meeting. So with your permission, if I may.
Please.
I think our planner and our engineer, just raise your right hand. Do you each swear or affirm that the testimony that you should give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I believe we have a member of the board who's listened to the tapes from the prior meetings, and we wanted to get that on record. Chris Stellatella.
I believe that he has in fact signed a certification that he has listened to the audio of the prior meetings regarding this application, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, for the record, Thomas Kelso on behalf of the applicant. Just as several housekeeping matters that I'd like to bring to the board's attention since our last meeting. First, the board will recall that we indicated that we would be providing an environmental impact statement to the board at least 10 days prior to this hearing. In fact, the environmental impact statement dated December 30th, 2014 was submitted to the planning department. I assume has been provided to the board members, and I would just like to move that environmental impact statement into the record.
Madam Chair, I would have an objection to that report going into the record, if I may be heard on that briefly.
Sure.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, for the record, Peter McGarth from the firm of Ace Rack & Associates, 627 North Mountain Turnpike, Mountain Plains, New Jersey. On behalf of Jen O'Neill, Alejandro Peroni, David Drinkwater, and John Mills. I respectfully object to the admission of this report into the record, inasmuch as Mr. Hughes, as I note on page 115 of the October transcript, was qualified before this board as a professional planner. The substance of the report that I've reviewed speaks of a 3-page plus discussion of historic resources and also comments on stormwater management, sensitive environmental features, and using headings like utilities and traffic. My understanding, unless I could be wrong, but my understanding was that he was not qualified for those areas. And, as such, the admission of this report should not be admitted because it does not he does not have the expertise required to prepare a report with respect to those areas.
Madam Chair, I certainly disagree with the objection. The primary focus of the environmental impact statement, and I assume the board has seen this, is that has to do with the historic resources issue, which Mr. Hughes specifically testified that he had experience and expertise in. With regard to the non-planning aspects, the environmental impact statement simply reiterates by just reference the engineering testimony that's already been provided in the record and the reports that were submitted as part of the pre-hearing submissions that are required by the applicant. It merely references a traffic study has been provided, it merely references the engineering testimony with regard to the stormwater management and utilities. An environmental impact statement can take on many forms. If the primary focus is one of engineering, it's generally submitted by the engineering partner in the firm. This one really deals primarily with the historic issues, and I respectfully submit to you that the substance of this is being submitted by a professional fully qualified to do so. Again, I move it for the record. Certainly, Mr. MacArthur has the opportunity to cross-examine Mr. Hughes on his content.
Madam Chair, if there are no questions from the board members, what I would advise the chair and the board is that this can be accepted into evidence. Council has an opportunity to cross-examine both as to the credentials and to the content of that report. If it does, in fact, if the board makes a determination that the report itself contains information that that Mr. Keenan is not otherwise qualified to provide as an expert in his field, you can certainly disregard that, but I believe that his qualifications were in fact put on the board, put on the record. This would be marked as A12.
Do any members of the board have any issues with the report being accepted and said? We'll accept it, and you have the right to cross.
Thank you. The second item to bring to the board's attention is that there's been some testimony by my client and statements made by my client through cross-examination having to do with whether or not there exists an agreement between Construction Management Associates, the applicant, and the New Brunswick Theological Seminary with respect to the leasing of the 10 units of housing in a proposed structure. Mr. Broder has testified, and again the record will reflect what his actual words, was that there was an understanding and that there was intended to be an agreement. The agreement was not in place yet. Since our last hearing, I just would report to the board and represent to you that there is now a written agreement that exists between Construction Management Associates and the New Brunswick Theological Seminary, which provides for the 10 units of housing. It provides for their commitment to provide those at the request of the Theological Seminary. It sets forth rental structure, it sets forth a term, and it also sets forth alternate units to the extent that these units are not ready for occupancy because they're not constructed yet, up to the time when they need units, in which case Construction Management Associates provide alternate housing for them. I make that representation to the board. Again, I have a copy of the signed agreement. It has proprietary information in it, so I'm not submitting it as a document, but I think it's necessary to update the facts as they've been testified to, because although I don't think it's particularly germane to the application itself, it certainly was part of discussion and cross-examination, and I think the board needs to know that those facts have actually changed now and there is an agreement that's in place.
Thank you, Mr. Tasso. Mr. McCarthy, did you have any witnesses that you wanted to call tonight?
Madam Chair, I'd like to cross-examine Mr. Hughes on the environmental impact statement that was submitted.
Okay.
And then I'll move on to my witnesses. Mr. Hughes, you are not a civil engineer, am I correct?
That's correct.
And you are not a traffic engineer either?
That's correct.
You never testified in either one of those disciplines?
That's correct.
Okay. In your report on page 1, I think it's the second paragraph, you have stated that the property fails to meet any of the New Jersey register criteria set forth in NJAC 7:4-2.3. Is that right?
Yes,
And you reviewed that section prior to writing this report?
I did.
In fact, it's entitled Criteria for Evaluation of a Property Nominated for Listing in the New Jersey Register. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And subsection A says that criteria for evaluation listed below shall be used by the park, the State Review Board, and the State Historic Preservation Officer to determine the eligibility of a property for listing in the New Jersey Register. Is that right?
That's correct.
And hasn't SHPO already determined this property as being eligible?
It has not.
SHPO has not determined this property to be eligible for inclusion into the register?
As far as I know, the district itself has been determined eligible. There's several structures on this property. 17 Mines certainly is not eligible, has never been deemed significant. The 29 Mine Street structure in 1980 was deemed eligible as part of the district. Obviously, things have changed since then. There has not been a detailed architectural survey submitted to SHPO's office as of 2014, so no final determination has been made with respect to whether or not the property can be listed on the National Register as part of the district.
As far as it's being listed, I would agree with you, sir, but in fact, it has been deemed as being eligible for that listing. Am I correct?
Again, if it has, it's based on very dated information from 1980.
Well, then the statement in your report to the effect that it's not eligible is incorrect. Am I right?
Again, I believe the overall district has been determined eligible, and there have not been determinations made with respect to which structures within that district would be contributing or not contributing.
According to this section that you cited, 7:42.3, isn't it true that SHPO decides the eligibility, not you, correct?
That's correct.
You had indicated reference also on page 1, I think it's the same paragraph, to an architectural survey prepared in 1980 for the Middlesex County Cultural and Heritage Commission. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's over 34 plus years ago, am I right?
Correct.
You didn't consult with anything more recent than that?
Again, there hasn't been any extensive architectural survey conducted that I'm aware of.
But we just discussed, though, that the property's been documented by SHPO last year.
Correct, and I would believe what was submitted to SHPO, and that was in fact the 1980 survey. So it seems to me that your client, the applicant, applying for this historic district designation is actually also relying on the 1980 survey.
Mr. Hughes, how many new homes have you seen that have stained glass?
How many new homes have I seen that have stained glass in them? I can't answer that question.
How many homes have you seen in New Brunswick with stained glass?
I can't answer that question.
How many homes have you seen with stained glass in the stonework of the chimney?
I can't answer that question.
Not many, fair to say?
I haven't done an extensive survey of the interiors or exteriors of every home in New Brunswick, so again, I'm not going to quantify that.
So, is it fair to say 29 Mine Street does not lack any architectural merit or integrity?
No, my opinion, someone with a a degree in historic preservation experience in the field, is that based on what I've observed, in my opinion, the 29 Mine Street structure, if it is located within an eligible district, would likely be determined to be a non-contributing structure, due in some part to some of the deterioration that has occurred over the years, certainly since 1980, among other reasons.
Isn't it true, sir, that the stained glass windows have not been removed from that building?
From what I can tell from the elevations, it appeared that some of the stained glass had been removed.
When was the last time you were at the building?
About a month ago.
And it's your testimony that the stained glass was removed at that time?
Again, what I observed, it appeared that some of the stained glass had been removed.
Doesn't the stained glass element at 29 Mine Street embody high artistic values under criterion C?
Not in my opinion. I don't think it would rise to the level of architecturally significant structure just because of the stained glass elements.
So are you saying that the quality of significance in this architecture does not have integrity of design?
It's really just a vernacular building. This is not a high style of architecture. To the extent it's, related to a larger historic district, again, my position is that it likely would be considered non-contributing.
So I'll repeat the question. As terms of the quality of significance in architecture, is it your testimony that it does not possess the integrity of design?
Yes.
Is it your testimony that it does not possess integrity of materials?
Yes.
Is it your testimony that it does not possess the integrity of workmanship?
Yes.
In your report, you had indicated that there is a 10-foot, you said the 10-foot setback is not uncommon on Mine Street, is that right?
Correct.
And in fact, you set forth 13 Mine Street as supporting of that, correct?
I did cite 13 Mine Street as an example.
Isn't 13 Mine Street located past the bend in the road? In Mine Street?
I think it's before the bend. I mean, it depends on which perspective you're coming from. From College Avenue before the bend.
If it was after the bend, it would not be the same streetscape, correct? It would be the same streetscape as 17 Mine Street.
It's the same streetscape. It's along Mine Street. The basic point is that the setbacks along Mine Street vary. And 13 Mine Street is an example of one that's slightly different than its neighbor at 15 Mine Street.
And your report also indicates that numbers 15 and 31 are set back closer to 30 feet. That's on both sides of this property question, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the other properties you mentioned are on the other side of Mine Street, am I right?
I did cite several examples across Mine Street.
And that's not the same streetscape as number 17.
It is the same streetscape.
Then you had indicated that the proposed building was only 4.5 feet higher than 17 Mine Street. Is that right?
Correct.
You would agree with me, wouldn't you, sir, that 17 Mine Street is not 3 lots wide? As the proposed building.
The existing structure on 17 Mine Street is at 3 lots wide. Well, it's located on 1 lot.
And it's, the building itself is not, 160 feet deep, is it?
Is the structure on 17 Mine Street smaller than what we are proposing as part of this project?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
In terms of depth and width, correct?
Yes.
Significantly smaller, wouldn't you say?
It's small, yes.
Is it fair to say that no building on Mine Street would be as large as the one that you're proposing?
Again, I think you asked this question in the last meeting, and my testimony was, based on my observations along Mine Street, this would likely be the largest structure on Mine Street, yes.
And in fact, in terms of 17 Mine Street, its height is really proportionate to its width and depth, is it not?
Can you repeat the question?
17 Mine Street, its height is proportionate to its width and depth, correct?
You're gonna have to explain that.
I'll move on. You further indicated in your report that the proposed building has a porch element to make it fit within the neighborhood. Am I correct in that?
Yes,
And that element is located on one corner of the proposed building, right?
correct.
And that porch does not extend over the entire front of your proposed building, am I right?
Right.
And don't the rest of the homes on Mine Street have porches that extend across the front of the homes?
I don't know that every building along Mine Street has a porch that extends across the entire front facade of the building.
Is it fair to say that the vast majority of them do?
No, again, I haven't quantified that. Porches are a common feature along Mine Street. That's the point.
Porches that extend across the front of their respective homes are common, correct?
No, I think it probably varies.
Is there any other building on Mine Street with 4-story walls on 3 sides?
With 4-story walls
On
on
three
3
sides.
sides.
Right.
So 4-story building elevation along 3 sides of the building. Off the top of my head, it's possible. I can't identify one by address off the top of my head.
Wasn't there testimony, sir, that the 4th floor can be seen across Mine Street?
I don't recall specific testimony, but I assume that it's possible that the 4th floor could be viewed from across Mine Street.
Is it your testimony, sir, that this building will not overwhelm the surrounding homes?
Yes,
Even the 2 sides and the rear of the building,
yes,
one of which sides, 4-story sides, is on 15 Mine Street?
yes.
Now, the EIS that you prepared does not list all the various licenses, permits, and other approvals as required by the City of New Brunswick, the County of Middlesex, or the State of New Jersey, am I right?
Correct.
And it doesn't contain anything about water quality analysis, am I right?
Correct.
It doesn't contain anything about aquifer recharge,
No, it does not.
or air quality,
No, it does not.
or noise,
No,
or damage or destruction to plant systems,
no,
or damage or destruction to wildlife.
no.
Does the report take into account steps taken before, during, or after construction to minimize the environmental impacts?
This specific report does not address that issue. No,
Does it discuss alternate designs of the project that might avoid environmental impacts?
no,
It doesn't set forth what parks or wildlife refuges or historic sites may be mapped on within the report?
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, I will. Your report as written does not set forth specifically mapping on the site and within 200 feet of any parks, wildlife refuges, or historic sites.
Within 200 feet, obviously I've addressed the historic resource issue in this report. We also reviewed NJDP maps. There's certainly no wetlands or any other sensitive environmental features on this property.
But the report itself does not contain the mapping, correct?
No.
And regarding on page 4 of your report, you're talking about various elements that are included, various elements of architecture that are included into your proposed building. In your proposed building, there's no elements that utilize Italian design elements, is that correct?
Are there any Italian design elements in this building?
The proposed building?
No, I don't think so.
Or Federalist?
No, I don't think so.
Or Victorian?
I don't think Victorian is a classified architectural style.
You said that 17 Mine Street and 29 Mine Street are non-contributing structures to the Mine Street Historic District. Is that fair to?
That's correct.
Okay. Isn't it true, sir, that modifications to a building alone don't disqualify a structure as non-contributing?
Well, I think that there's certainly alterations to a building can undermine the integrity of that structure, and therefore...
In and of itself?
Absolutely.
Is it same question as to the lack of maintenance for a building? Does that disqualify it alone? Just the lack of maintenance?
Deterioration, alteration over time can certainly, again, undermine the integrity of a historic structure, yes.
But just lack of maintenance individually, is that without alteration?
Well, if lack of maintenance results in physical alterations to the building that undermine its integrity, then the answer is yes.
On page 3 of your report, you talk about a 7-foot gap. And I think you even indicated it takes away from the aesthetic of the neighborhood, right?
Yes.
Is there such a thing as historically retained open space in some instances?
Is there such a thing as
Yeah.
historically retained open space?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Something that was planned when the structure was built many moons ago.
Sure.
Okay. If that were true, that this 70 feet wouldn't be a gap, would it?
In the 1980 architectural survey that looked at a potential historic district along Mine Street, I don't recall any discussion about the significance of the open space located on this property. It certainly isn't historically significant. And in my view, from both a planning perspective and a preservation perspective, it's really just a giant gap in the streetscape that really breaks up the continuity of the existing structures on the street.
If there was a historically retained open space, that doesn't negate the historic value of the district, does it?
Does a historically retained open space
Correct.
negate the value of a historic district?
Correct.
No, certainly if there's a historic district where there's planned open space that was part of some kind of, historic plan that was deemed significant, yeah, that would have some significance.
When you prepared your report, Mr. Hughes, did you look at any existing future street demographics?
Demographics?
Correct.
No.
Did you look at any socioeconomic did you look at the socioeconomic situation of Mine Street?
No, I did not.
Did you look at how the existing target market will impact the community?
As part of this environmental impact statement?
Correct.
No, I did not.
Is it your opinion that demolishing contributing structures to create space for infill in a historic district is not sound preservation policy?
Can you repeat the question?
Is it your opinion that demolishing contributing structures to create space for infill in a historic district is not sound preservation?
I think it's a question of balance, because there are situations where contributing structures, if there is some public purpose, that can be advanced by redevelopment, if that redevelopment is appropriate, if it fits within the context of a historic district, if in fact, these structures are contributing in a hypothetical scenario. I don't think that undermines the integrity of the historic district if it's appropriate development.
You talk about sensitive environmental features in your report. Isn't it true there's no delineation of what maps were looked at?
You already asked me that question.
When you gave your testimony, not only tonight but previously, you had access to Mr. Legal's traffic report, did you not?
I did.
And your report indicates that the level of service would not change, am I right?
Correct.
Isn't it true that Mr. Legal did not submit a traffic report which indicates a level of service for this application?
That was information produced by Stonefield's office that I've reviewed and incorporated in this report. I don't recall exactly what materials were submitted to the board. Certainly, his testimony supported that.
Mr. Olivo's testimony supported the level of service didn't change? Is that your testimony?
I don't recall his specific testimony, but this is information from Stonefield Engineering's office.
That's all the questions I have at the moment. And Madam Chair, as I indicated at the last meeting, I would like to reserve any further cross-examination with any of the applicant's witnesses after the rest of the public questions, the witnesses after our. Okay?
Just for the record, I'm not sure exactly what that really means. Once the application...
The last transcript, Mr. Kelso.
Yes, well, okay, that's fine. Certainly, once the application is completed, the cross-examination of the witnesses is completed, and then the public wishes to speak. I'm just trying to understand the limit of what the board will do to then allow more cross-examination of witnesses after the public has an opportunity to speak. Because, frankly, we've been at this a while. I'd like to know at what point is enough. So, I understand what he's asking, but I'm going to put on the record that I think there needs to be some reasonable limit as to how much we go back and forth.
I understand that, but we did give him the right at the last meeting.
I understand.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Hughes and Ross?
I have no regret.
Just have a moment, Madam Chair. Just give me a moment. Okay, I'm going to call my first witness, John Mills. Can everyone hear me okay?
All right. Just raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name, please.
It's Jonathan Mills, M-I-L-L-S.
And do you swear to tell the truth in this matter?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. As I said, my name is Jonathan Mills, and I have lived at 13 Mine Street for 22 years with my partner, David Drinkwater. I'd like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak today about the Mine Street application. I would also like to recognize your service as members of this board and to acknowledge your steadfastness in attending to this particular matter for what I think we are all surprised to find is now going on about a year. Having said that, I also feel the need to tell you that I'm disappointed and upset that based on what was said at the December meeting, public comment from the April 2014 meeting of this board will not be part of the record you will consider in reaching a decision about this application. To the best of my knowledge, there was no explicit public notice that a de novo application was to be heard and that April's public comment would become irrelevant. I fear this will be seen as a betrayal of the efforts made by concerned citizens to attend and speak at that meeting. And I fear that our fellow citizens may find it hard to accept the validity of a decision that is made while disregarding such extensive public comment, far more public comment than I have witnessed when observing the board's consideration of other applications. I'd like to speak next about parking and traffic, starting with parking. At the November meeting, reference was made to certain standards and to consideration of local conditions. I'd like to tell you a bit about what I see in our neighborhood, the local conditions as I see them. One of the applicant's witnesses, Mr. Olivo, said that there would be no detriment in allowing the proposed building to have only 43 parking spaces rather than those that are required, a whopping 55% shortfall according to the revised proposal. His proofs included the proposition that the apartments could be rented even without access to an on-site space. I don't think that's much of a proof. Renters can own cars and park them on the already overcrowded streets where permits are not required, adding to the pressure on the permit streets. Or they might buy permits from people who can get more permits than they actually need. Or they will park illegally and hope they don't get a ticket, or pay the ticket as a price of doing business. Parking is such a problem in our neighborhood that these things happen all the time. And I've been told that directly by people who live in the neighborhood. Now, maybe it's because I live on Mine Street, but contrary to what Mr. Broder said that he has seen, I can tell you as a resident that I see cars parked illegally all the time, and often they are unticketed. One day, last spring, as an example, on a morning when alternate side parking rules were in effect, I counted 44 cars parked illegally on the streets within 1 block's distance from 17 Mine Street, bounded by Easton, Prosper, Stone, College, and Hamilton, and including Mine Street and Union Street. 44 illegally parked cars in that small area, just 1 block in every direction from 17 Mine Street. This is the local condition as I see it. I can also tell you from personal experience that we frequently have problems in our neighborhood when a repair person or a guest needs to use one of our visitor parking passes. Often they cannot find parking space on our street. It's been happening with more frequency in recent years. Visitors coming to our house for dinner having to turn around and go home because they cannot find a place to park. Can you imagine that where you live? So, high numbers of cars parked illegally and not consistently ticketed, local tenants without permits buying permits illegally, residents, both renters and homeowners and guests, finding it difficult and sometimes impossible to find a place to park. These are not vague statistics from a generalized study. This is the neighborhood-specific truth about local conditions when it comes to parking. Speaking of visitors, I'm dumbstruck that no visitor parking spaces are proposed for the residents of 17 Mine Street. Not one. Will the residents of the proposed building never have guests or visitors? If the residents happen to be students, where will mom and dad park when they come to campus? What's the applicant's plan for visitor parking? Now, the idea was floated by the applicant that providing fewer parking spaces than required would serve the public interest by discouraging use of cars and encouraging use of public transportation. I like that goal, but depriving people of their legal right to park seems to me like a bad way to achieve it. In any case, I think there are at least two reasons why this justification doesn't stand up. First of all, Rutgers does indeed have an extensive system that supplements New Brunswick's meager public transport, but service overall is not comprehensive. There are big gaps. Students who live in apartments like the ones that have been proposed need to shop for groceries. Many have part-time jobs. They drive home on weekends. In New Brunswick and nearby Middlesex County, the combination of public transportation and Rutgers bus services might meet your needs if your destination happens to be near one of the routes and you can live with the once-an-hour schedule of the New Jersey Transit buses. But service is not comprehensive. On Hamilton Street, a significant artery, there's no bus service. One of the New Brunswick shuttle routes crosses Hamilton at Lewis, but the service is extremely limited. If you need to get further into Somerset than Lewis Street, your public transportation options are nil. On Easton Avenue, another major artery, as we all know, there's no bus service past St. Peter's Hospital. So forget going to Rutgers Plaza or anywhere in that direction. Let's say you manage to get a part-time job as close as Boundbrook. Boundbrook's what, 10 or 15 minutes away by car? But you're in big trouble if you don't have a car. The New Jersey Transit website calculates that it will take an hour and 20 minutes to get to Boundbrook on public transportation, requiring a train to Newark and another train to Boundbrook. If you want to go by bus, it'll take 2 hours, according to the New Jersey Transit website. The second problem with the applicant's argument is that the proposed building may not necessarily house students in its entirety. The proposal is for open market housing. The owner may choose to rent to students, and I guess there's a temporary agreement, or at least a temporary agreement to do so, but it doesn't appear bound to do so by the application itself, the terms of the application itself. If you can't take advantage of Rutgers transportation, that is, if you're not associated with Rutgers, or if the university is on break or it's a weekend, when the number of Rutgers bus routes drops by 2/3 or more, then your public transportation options are very limited and not remotely adequate. As other people said during public comment, public transportation for New Brunswick residents simply is not yet comprehensive enough to justify ignoring the applicable regulations regarding parking requirements. This is among the realities of local conditions for Mine Street. The applicant will be doing the city and its residents harm by providing fewer parking places than are required, and I urge you to reject the applicant's request for a variance. It's no surprise the public comment about this project has repeatedly focused on parking problems in the 6th Ward and in the Mine Street neighborhood in particular. It's been a problem for years. But the last detailed study of record that I could find was a report to the New Brunswick City Council from the Ad Hoc Parking Permit Advisory Committee in 2000. That was 15 years ago. Now, I've learned that just since 2010, 6 buildings in this area have been constructed with variances for enormous parking shortfalls versus what's required. 75 to 81 Easton Avenue with a 52% shortfall, 62 Sycard with a 56% shortfall, 6 Sycard, 57% shortfall, 10 Union, 50% shortfall, 15 Union, 44% shortfall, 54 Ray Street, 54% shortfall. No study that I am aware of has been undertaken to determine the impact on this specific neighborhood of all this construction with these enormous parking shortfalls. Please think about all that I have said and that many, many others have said about parking problems in this area. We're not making this up. The applicant is asking you to ignore local conditions and grant another huge parking variance. I urge you instead to deny the application, as there are no proofs whatsoever concerning the parking shortfall vis-a-vis the 15-year-old parking permit report on file and the testimony given by Mr. Olivo. Turning to traffic, at an earlier meeting, someone asked if consideration had been given to potential traffic problems on Mine Street in the event that a parking garage might be constructed on the section of College Avenue Redevelopment Plan Area 2 that is on the opposite side of Vine Street from the site of the proposed building. Excuse me. The question was dismissed at the time as hypothetical. Well, that parking garage seems closer to construction now, but in any case, the issue is a reality today, though in a slightly different form. The large surface parking lot that it comprised a significant portion of redevelopment area 2 has been reconfigured. Its old entrance and exit on College Avenue have been taken out of service. Instead, the lot now uses as its entrance and its exit the two-way driveway on Main Street that is directly across the street from the site of the proposed building. That driveway used to serve the small lot beside the Targum building. Now the driveway is being used as the sole entrance and exit for that small lot and the much larger lot behind it. The Main Street driveway that used to serve a parking lot with 28 spaces now serves a lot with 120 spaces, an increase of more than 300%. On top of that, at least for now, this same driveway is being used as an access point for construction-related vehicles and equipment heading for the Hillel construction site in Area 2. I think the impact of these changes on Main Street traffic conditions directly in front of the site of the proposed building demands that the application be denied, especially considering that trash and delivery trucks for the proposed building at 17 Main would be sticking out into narrow Main Street at times. This is no longer a hypothetical situation. This is an important, potentially hazardous local condition that shouldn't be overlooked. With respect to traffic then and to parking too, as I discussed earlier, I urge you to deny this application rather than approving it on the basis of generalized statistics, weak proofs, outdated information, and a total disregard of the local conditions that residents in the neighborhood, students and other renters, as well as permanent residents, face every day. Moving on to other topics. Like my neighbors, I'm worried about the impact of the proposed building on water pressure, drainage, the impact of excavation on our old foundations, and construction site safety. I'm also concerned about the impact of the proposed building on light and shade in the neighborhood. The shade study submitted by the applicant neglected to include the dark winter months when the sun is low and daylight hours are short. Our already shorter days on Main Street will be even shorter and darker if this application is approved. Stand in our backyard in the middle of the afternoon and look toward the existing much smaller structure at 17 Main and you'll see what I mean. Another thing, at the March 11th meeting and the October 14th meeting, and in the application materials, it's been noted that the current buildings on the 17 Main Street property are derelict. I want to reiterate what others have said during public comment. These buildings were in perfectly good shape before Rutgers bought them, and at that point their appearance was perfectly acceptable. Since December 2013, construction management has allowed the buildings to continue to deteriorate, and I find it appalling that the building's condition, which is solely the result of neglect since they were sold by the Diocese of Metuchen, is used as an argument in support of this application. The applicants should be ashamed of themselves, first for letting the buildings fall to rack and ruin, and never trying to use their condition as an argument in support of their proposal. I have another point I'd like to raise. Imagine some good friends of yours came to you all excited and told you they'd found a builder for their new house. They were a little concerned though. The builder had agreed to build a 4-bedroom house, but the contract the builder wants your friends to sign specifies a 2-bedroom house. Would you advise them to sign the contract? Should they accept the builder's verbal assurances? In its application materials, construction management statement of principal point says, and I quote, "The upper 3 levels of the building would be available to the open market," end quote. In the previous meeting, Mr. Broder confirmed in testimony that there were not written agreements with any educational institution to provide student housing. He says they fully intend to rent to students. Now, Mr. Kelso says there is now an agreement with the seminary. He didn't say for how long it was. And the majority of the building has no such commitments. They say that they intend to rent to students. They've given you a verbal. But the contract, that is the statement of principal points, says open market housing. I think the applicant is putting you all in a tough spot. In the College Avenue redevelopment plan, the Area 2 intent is, and I quote, "the development of uses that are ancillary or in support of the college uses located in the neighborhood." What will our fellow citizens say if the applicant's proposal is approved on a verbal? And at best, an agreement of limited term to rent just a fraction of the units in the building to seminary parties? What will members of the city council say, or the courts for that matter, if the verbal is student housing but the contract says open market housing? I'm hard put to see how you can possibly approve this application. Verbal assurances, limited term agreements are meaningless in this context. This application fails to meet the Area 2 intent. Now, the city's master plan points to the need for improved housing and more housing for students and other residents in the 6th Ward. I agree with that. A great deal of additional student housing has been built in the last few years, and a lot is currently under construction in redevelopment plan areas 1 and 3. This building may end up providing very limited, or even over time, no student housing. Also, the master plan places a premium on the continuing presence of homeowners, like me. And the College Avenue redevelopment plan underscores the need for new development to be in harmony with adjacent buildings and any existing architectural patterns in the neighborhood. The proposed building seems to me to fall short of all this, far short. The proposed building scale and its envelope-filling, view-obstructing, daylight-blocking bulk are entirely unharmonious with respect to the other buildings on both sides of Main Street, and particularly with respect to the buildings adjacent to the subject property. It seems to me that consideration of the design guidelines is an area where your experience and judgment as members of this board are especially important. We, your neighbors and fellow citizens, are counting on you to give the guidelines the weight they deserve in this unusual situation. Surely these guidelines are especially relevant and significant in this instance when a development zone has been created smack in the middle of a residential zone. I'd like to cite specific guidelines in the redevelopment plan. In paragraph 1A, overall design concept, as you've heard before, it is stated that all, and I quote, "all new buildings shall be related harmoniously to the terrain, natural features, and to existing buildings and other substantial structures in the vicinity that have a visual relationship to the proposed building," end quote. In paragraph 1B, building height and setting, it is stated that, quote, "the particular location of new buildings on the site should provide an appropriate harmonious relationship to existing area structures, landforms, and water bodies in terms of height, setback, view preservation, and related aspects of its urban context. In particular areas, building height and orientation should be located and oriented to maintain such relationships or to preserve visual access to community focal points, either natural, for example, a river, or man-made, for example, cultural institutions, churches, etc." End quote. In paragraph 1C, building design elements, it stated that the building facade should, quotes, "reflect," in quotes, "the size, scale, and setbacks of adjacent buildings and those across the street." I'd like to show you a Google Map image of the subject property and its surroundings in our neighborhood.
I think we're up to 07. My count is right, Mr. Rainbow.
07.
Well, I'll put this here. I may not be able to see you, but you'll be able to hear me for a minute. Maybe I'll take this. Okay. I printed this from Google Maps, and I blew it up at Office Depot, and I pasted it onto this board.
Council, would you mind putting today's date in 07 on there before we
Yeah, I just didn't want to interrupt the witness, counsel.
Sorry.
We're calling it the Google neighborhood map. map?
This is a Google neighborhood map. Yeah, I Googled the 17 Mine Street and I took a snapshot. You can see the relative sizes of the existing buildings on the street. This is the subject property here, 1729 Mine Street, the driveway going back. There's a little garage apartment there that's not shown here. This is my house at 13, our neighbor at 15, the quarterly office, I think it's 31. You can see these buildings are all pretty well in the same size. The setback here, our house is actually a little closer to the street around the bend here, but all along the straight part of Mine Street here, these setbacks are very uniform, absolutely uniform. You can see also the buildings that face Prosper and Stone on the other side of the property, again, very similar sizes. And across the street, similarly sized buildings. Now, I have a second one, so we'll have to label another exhibit if you'll excuse me.
It's okay. Oh, 08 for the record.
This is the same view onto which I placed the outline of the proposed building. The outline was taken from the architectural renderings in the application. I sized it and placed it in taking into account the shape, dimensions, and location of the proposed building relative to the dimensions of the lot.
Excuse me, I am going to object to this. There's no foundation for having professionally looked at the dimensions of this building, whether it accurately reflects the actual plan. I certainly don't object if Mr. Mills wants to complete his testimony. I understand that he wants to do that, but I do want to place the objection on the record because I think there really is not a proper foundation for this particular exhibit.
I guess I'm not a professional, but I can tell you that I sized this imprint based on the relative dimensions of the lot, taking into account the plan that was submitted, calculating the relative dimensions in all directions and placing it there. If anything, I think it understates the setback at the front of this new building.
Again, I'm not doubting his sincerity and that he worked very hard at it. I just really don't think there's a proper foundation.
Counselor, did you want to lay the foundation?
Yes, my witness can't see me, but I'll give it a shot. Mr. Mills, can you take a step back and detail, in minute detail, how you scaled the proposed building onto I believe it's 8, and the procedure that you undertook in order to do so?
On the Google map, when I printed it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, the depth from the front of the property to the line that's drawn here, I measured that, and I believe, I can't remember exactly, I believe it was 2.5 inches. And then I took the dimensions of the lot from the application, I believe it's 163-foot depth, and I came up with a multiplier, and I applied that multiplier to the length of the building as described in the plan, that is the length of the lot, less the 10-foot setback at the front and the 10-foot setback at the back. And I then sized this cutout, which is, as I say, an outline taken from the application itself, to meet those measurements.
And in terms of the plans you were discussing, you mentioned, you're talking about Mr. Scotch's floor plans, am I correct?
I don't know who prepared it, but it was the application that was submitted. In fact, it was called Planning Board Submission 08-12-2014. And I referred to page 8202 for the small outline. And I referred to the original application for the dimensions of the lot.
Just a question for Mr. Mills. Did you compare the dimensions of that building with the bulk criteria of the redevelopment plan when you were preparing this? In other words, what's permitted in the plan?
I know that the bulk dimensions are permitted in the plan. My import here was to show this scale in the relativity to the other buildings.
All right, so you are aware that all those dimensions are permitted in the plan?
I do. I think the plan is wrong-headed, but I do acknowledge that they exist in the plan.
Mr. Mills, your intent is to show the size of the building relative to the others in the district, am I correct?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Mr. Mills, would you mind turning that a little bit so I can see?
Oh, I guess the language, in fact, I can, if you wouldn't mind sending these down the line, I have a handout for the board member.
Anybody have an objection to the handouts? Okay.
It's the same images on the front and the back as I was presented here. Thank you. So this is, of course, is a matter of opinion, but it seems to me that the size, the scale, and the front and rear setbacks do not even remotely reflect in any way the size, scale, and setbacks of adjacent buildings or of those across the street. I think the building fails to meet the requirements of paragraphs 1A and 1C, and I would respectfully suggest to Mr. Hughes that the proposed building will indeed overwhelm the buildings around it, including ours. As for paragraph 1B, the failure to respect and reflect the setbacks of the adjacent buildings results in a failure to meet the requirement in paragraph 1B to preserve visual access to community focal points. People walking or driving north on Mine Street will no longer be able to see the Second Reformed Church on College Avenue as they do now. People standing in front of the seminary on College Avenue will not be able to enjoy the view of Mine Street's westerly facades as they do now. People in buildings on the west side of Mine Street here and on the east side of Stone Street, as I said before, will be overwhelmed by the four-story building at 17 Mine that will stretch far back into the lot, twice the length and more of the neighboring structures on Mine Street. I'm going to take these down so I can see you. In paragraph 1C, building design elements, it stated that, and I quote, the selection of building design elements, for example, in the use of materials, fenestration, color, texture, etc., should ensure that such treatment is harmonious with that prevalent in the area, where such prevalence exists and where such harmony is desirable. In paragraph 1F, side and rear elevations, it stated that, and I quote, appearance of the side and rear elevations is important, end quote. And it goes on to say, quotes, other guidelines for fronts of buildings shall also apply to the rear and sides, end quote. The revised plans include design features for the facade of the building that differ from the original design with respect to architectural elements and use of materials. Behind the facade, however, to the very rear of the building, there are no such design features. The side and rear elevations are distinctly not harmonious with the adjacent buildings or others in the immediate vicinity. The design violates paragraphs 1C and 1F. As I said before, I think the proposed design falls far short of the design guidelines. I think the guidelines are in the redevelopment plan for good reason, and especially in this situation, they deserve to be closely observed. I'm afraid that if the proposed building is approved, it will discourage home ownership in the ward, contrary to the goals noted in the city's master plan. Those of us who live here now might stay because we love our homes so much. But I doubt that anyone in the future will choose to make their home near a building this size, by my calculations, 20 to 30 times the size of the adjacent buildings at 31 and 15, and 15 to 30 times the size of other houses on the block. Think again about that exhibit. If you live in a neighborhood, or if someone in your family does, where the houses are set back in pretty much the same way along the block, the houses are pretty much the same size as one another, as you can see they are in our neighborhood, and backyards share a fence, please try to imagine how you would feel if a building 20 times the size of your house were to be built right next door or just a few doors away. Imagine, as one person suggested in her public comment, having a Target store constructed just yards from your house. Or to put it another way, suppose by some fluke the property next door to your home was rezoned for a new use. Wouldn't you want those responsible for decisions about what would fill that property to make sure that the new construction met its newly approved use and was compatible with your home and other surrounding houses? We've chosen to live in a college neighborhood. We enjoy it, and we don't mind the sometimes noisy energy that comes with it. But please, let us have new construction at 17 Mine Street that is in conformity with design guidelines, with parking requirements, with the city's master plan. New construction that does not wreak a substantial negative impact on our community by its design or by the granting of a de maximis parking variance. With all respect, I urge you to reject this application. Thank you.
My next witness is Alejandro Peroni.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
before we go on to the next witness, counsel, 08 and 07 and 08, I understand the bulk of Mr. Mills's testimony is really regarding, with relations to those two exhibits, is really the size of the structure that's being proposed as compared to the remaining structures. However, I haven't heard anything at all to show that the Google Maps that he presented, how they were prepared, or that those structures as depicted on here are accurate depictions of the size of the structures that surround this area. I don't know that Mr. Mills would be qualified to provide any testimony with how Google does that.
May I offer instead a photographic satellite image of the same area?
So I didn't hear you.
May I offer a photographic satellite image of the same area that shows those houses in their actuality?
I need to confer with your counsel.
Well, it's your exhibit. We're out over here.
Mr. Athol, inasmuch as Mr. Lavornia prepared this exhibit, I will have him
Go ahead.
introduce it.
Also, before I sit down, I just wanted to say, you characterized the bulk of my testimony as having been concerned with that exhibit. That was not the case, I think, sir. It was not the bulk of my testimony.
Madam Chair, just so we're clear, the bulk of the testimony regarding 07 and 08 were regarding the size of the building.
Mr. Lavornia, you have to be sworn in.
Sir, can you raise your right hand, state your name, spell your last name for me, please?
Alexander Litwarnia, Litwornia.
And do you swear to the whole truth in this matter?
Yes, I do.
Please proceed.
Mr. Litwarnia, for purposes of your testimony now, I would ask you to, for the sake of brevity, present your qualifications.
For the sake of brevity, I'm a professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. Sure. I'm a professional engineer in the state of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Florida. professional planner also in New Jersey. I've got over 30 years of professional engineering experience within this area and this region, testified at various boards, including North Brunswick, South Brunswick, Manville, Edison Township, and various other boards throughout the state. And we represent various boards throughout the state in traffic and transportation planning matters usually.
Thank you.
I offer him as a traffic engineer and also in terms of the engineering testimony required to present this next exhibit.
Well, basically what we did is we took two Google Earth photographs. The Google Earth photographs were taken 9/19/2013, and basically what we did is I took them, had them scaled, and printed out at a certain scale, took the scaled site plan buildings from these exhibits, and after modified them so that the site plan building would be at the same scale as the aerial maps, we placed them on there and also put on the setback from the buildings, and put them onto two photographs. First one shows the lot in question, the property in question, as well as the area of the street with the setbacks marked in red. You want to mark that to a certain number?
09.
09, please.
And the date, sir?
Yes. 1/13/15.
This is Google photo showing setbacks.
Correct. The front yard setbacks along Line Street. The second photo, the second aerial, we've marked it as 010. There's another Google Earth photograph taken 9/19/2013. And on that one, it shows the front yard setback as well as the proposed building that's scaled off and placed in, where you can see that the setback along Mine Street or in one area, and then there's an encroachment further towards Mine Street on the property in question on the proposed building, we can set the scale. And if anybody has any questions, otherwise that's just the purpose of my testimony for this right now. Maybe I could tilt it a little.
Can I just ask a question or two, because I'm a little confused, it's hard to say. Which exhibit do you have on the front? Is that 09?
This exhibit is 010.
010? The red,
and 010 are basically the same. 010 shows the building.
and the long red line, I'm sorry.
010 shows the property in question with the building in question. It's scaled off of the drawing.
Okay, and the long red line is intended to show the setback?
Correct. Front yard setback along Line Street.
Okay, just for orientation purposes, can you show me Mr. Mills's home? Mr. Mills's home.
The two homes, I believe, I'll let Mr. Mills show you his house.
That's fine.
He's more familiar with it than I am.
It's this one, similarly as on the Google map that I showed, it's located differently than the other buildings that are in this line after the bend.
I see, okay. I don't have any objection to this exhibit.
Thank you.
So I guess, to Mr. Antil's point, I think you'll see from here, these buildings are pretty similar in scale all along the street here. And that was one point in my other exhibit. Did you folks get a chance to see that?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
in light of the clarification by, I'm sorry, Mr., is it Lapornia?
That's correct.
Council, did you want to withdraw 07 and 08?
No, I don't.
Well, again, I'm going to object to them, but I think 9 to 10 are better.